feel the weight and the gravity work through your body, optimizing the alignment, so that feeling of weight, pressure down can go straight through, like water running down a pane of glass, down a straight vertical surface. The water is just free to flow straight down. So part of that also has a sense of emptying the body too. So the alignment, or just like water down a straight plane of grass or glass, but also body empty, so it doesn't meet any obstacles along the way. So that straightness or verticalness, and then as well, emptiness, opening, empty. So it's a constant process of roaming the awareness through the body, sinking the mind deeper and deeper into the body. Some of all the typical details we say are mechanical ways to get close to an optimum position and shape, to allow that process, that water dripping down freely. So those mechanical things of lower back is flat, back of the neck is long and flat, sitting the shoulders, hanging the hips. But eventually, more and more, you just do it with your Ting, with your internal awareness, feeling and sensing your body and what needs to happen. And it's quite an interesting thing when you start to have the energy tell you how to move or how to be or how to align, or your Ting, your inner listening, inner awareness guides you. All of a sudden you go, oh, okay, I had to lengthen or open or straighten my lower back to feel, in this case, I'm talking about gravity working more freely, or imagining that water dripping more freely down. Oh, I have to make that shape to allow that feeling to occur. And lo and behold, that's what we're mechanically saying all the time. Just straighten the lower back or point the tailbone, hang the hips. Okay, so that's why we do that. So.
And can I just ask about that? So is that a sensation of like your attention's drawn there almost as if like, you know, the energy wants to flow through, and so it's helping you realize, oh, this is not optimal.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the process now for you guys, more and more and more. Mechanically, the things that we say, you know, point the tailbone to the ground, or fill the yow, push back a bit, empty the chest, hit the shoulder, all those things, string at the back, crown of the head. Those are mechanical things that we go through. And certainly in the beginning, that's what everybody needs. But what you're saying now, sensing that, and then either intending the adjustment or allowing the adjustment that wants to occur, that's really where you want to be going more and more and more. So it's really important that we do articulate that. And articulate that and verbalize that, make it apparent that that's the direction we want to go in. So we're becoming more internally referenced, and either the awareness guides us, and eventually the energy, the chi, guides us. So that's the process we want to stay open to and actively encourage. So it's really good that you mentioned that. Again, throughout the rest of the class here, please feel free to make comments, awarenesses that you're noticing, or questions regarding these things. So this is going deeper, going further. It's developing ourselves, developing our Ting, developing our song, our releaseness, changing and cultivating our body. So that process that you just noticed in specifically this area here, just now, again, stay with Ting, scan inside the body and find another area. Like for example, I'm noticing some little bit of constriction at the top point of the shoulder blades, both actually, but even more so on the right. So not only do I sense that up there, I sense one side is more tight than the other. So that same process that you did here, I'm going to do here now. So now you're working with this inner technology, this inner, so it's the internal referencing, the internal aspect of the art, rather than physically, mechanically, all those things that beginners need for a long time. This is really the process now that you want to participate in. For example, is your abdomen a constriction of the water just dripping freely down the pane of glass, or the weight just falling freely, cleanly, vertically? Is your abdomen a constriction to that process, or allowing that process and completely allowing that process? Now you might notice, let's say even if you notice it's fairly, oh, I'm still kind of fairly released here, it's not too bad. But again, that's all relative, right? That water can drip more freely, that weight can be more vertical and more free. So what can you do with the abdomen? Or what can you allow the abdomen to find to allow basically what you did here, allow now, let's say specifically to the abdomen. You probably noticed some changes either that you made or could make room, space for a change to occur. Yes? Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely, yeah, even though it was released, I realized there was another whole level of releasing, which I certainly felt in the tissues of my abdomen, but I really felt that my legs had to take on what had been held up here, got transferred down here in a way that felt new.
Absolutely. So that's the whole process. That's the whole process. And that you noticed that something happened with the legs had to take on more, there was a further dropping. That is exactly the process that we do ourselves more and more, deeper, deeper, finer, finer. Exactly right. Oh, pretty released, but actually now that I bring my awareness there, I can release more, and the subsequent changes that occur through the rest of the body, and in this case, really strongly with the legs. That's excellent, excellent. Do the same thing with the chest. How tight, and as you referenced here, there's always more we can release, always more. So go to the assumption, the understanding that no matter how released and song I am, I can always song more. I can always release more. So that kind of attitude or frame of mind allows you to see more. You're open to seeing smaller things. So go to the chest and see how you can open and release the chest. So one thing with the chest, as we've mentioned before, to talk kind of macro first of all, of course we don't want the chest puffed out. That's too yang, and it creates a congestion here. And we don't want a depression, that's too yin, and that also is a depression, suppression. Again, too yin. So if I use the same right now imagery, I kind of started with the imagery of rain coming down pane of glass. If I kind of stay with that theme, if you imagine a drop of water, if a drop of water is running down a glass or a vase that's rounded, so this is going to be puffed out, so it's rounded, it's convex. A drop of water coming down a vase or a pitcher, of water. Let's say there's condensation happening on the outside of the pitcher. So there's a drop of water that's formed. If the shape is convex, that drop of water has to slow as it goes over that bump or that hill. So that drop of water, it might start out with some movement, and to get around that curvature, it's slowed down. So gravity isn't working freely. That drop of water, that water isn't moving freely. If this is convex, that drop of water speeds up. It's zoomed through by that shape. And that also is not working cleanly in a line with gravity. It's not in harmony with gravity. So when it's slowed down, it's not free to move with gravity. When it's convex, it's being accelerated. Something's being added to it. It's not natural with gravity. So if that pitcher of water is like a pane of glass and that it's straight down, that drop of water falls naturally, freely, the lines of gravity. If my chest is neutral, and so if you imagine a water drop dripping down the chest, if it's puffed out, it's going to take longer to go around that curvature. It's going to be slowed down. If I'm caved in, it's going to speed up. So I want it to be going straight down like a pane of glass. And so if you want to use that imagery, sometimes I find that helpful, is how is that drop of water falling or running down the front of my body, front of my chest? Is it being slowed down, or is it being accelerated, or is it being totally in alignment with naturalness, totally in agreement with that vertical line of gravity? And notice what that changes in other parts of the body, or what it wants to have another part of the body do. For example, specifically, and we talk about this mechanically at first, this neutralizing activates the yao. So this yinning, it's more yin, and this is more yang. So this releasing down fills this out. So a lot of times we do that mechanically. But sometimes, if you're really, really, really hanging, this will lengthen and fill out because you're not shortened up here and holding up. It will naturally lengthen. And this will just hang neutrally with gravity. But this is the yin-yang pairing, the chest and the lower back. So this yins and this yangs, as this flows down, as this relaxes down, you can imagine this relaxing down pushes this out.
And so what I noticed mostly is that it asks for a different kind of breathing pattern. So if I arrived at the beginning of the class breathing a lot from the front, it seems to want like that inhalation to expand down feels better. I often don't move that much in my lower back on an inhalation, but it does seem like to find some sort of sense of that line, inhalation has to be down and then retracing.
Yes, that's right. And even as you just even use the word breath, triggered my mind to be more conscious of this area. And exactly same thing I was aware of, that it fills the abdomen much more so with the breath. The breath really drops and fills. And so you're saying specifically, you're noticing the in-breath fills and expands down and out. Of course, normal tight people, it's pretty much the opposite. Exactly the opposite of that. In-breath is up. It's up and tight and high. So, very nice. You notice that change the breathing, and breathing to what we're always saying mechanically, right? Mechanically, we say breathe into the abdomen, and eventually the lower back to the entire circumference of the torso. And now you're spontaneously, naturally, I would say, gifted that. You're spontaneously finding that happening, noticing that happening, and so setting things up. Then we're gifted the Tai Chi body, or gifted certain things. Or as we've been putting it lately, we set up certain causes and then we notice results. Set up certain causes to create certain results. So we're talking about certain things we're doing that created other results, created other things. But it's, I would use that word, we're then gifted that breathing, that deeper, fuller breathing, as we use our awareness and set things up. So those changes that you notice and that you know that are proper or in the right direction, or you just know that feels much better, dwell there, abide there for a while. Notice it, appreciate it. So specifically with that breath, it's like, oh, okay. You want to anchor that experience, so savor it. The other things you notice with the lower back, whatever else we have noticed so far, you want to soak that in, you want to absorb it. And then your mind body does absorb it more, retain it more. You want to digest those new experiences. Now, how about if we do the same process to the shoulders? We'll go specifically to an area and see if you just become, in this case, the shoulders. Enter into the shoulders with your Ting. Deep sentientness in the shoulder joints. Notice what's there, what's happening there. Can they release a bit more? And if they do release a bit more, what do you notice? How does it feel? And are there any other changes made anywhere else, or sensations anywhere else when you do release more, or it is released more? Specifically in the shoulders.
I feel like releasing kind of up my neck, which is nice because it's so tight in through here in the back, not as much here, but when this started to open up, it kind of allowed it to open up further into my neck.
Right.
Which is nice.
Right, excellent. Yeah. So get into that, enjoy that. Let it, allow it to happen even more if it's able or willing to stretch open or have that effect in the neck. Really allow that. So since we're kind of in that area, so what about if we send our Ting specifically to the back of the neck, either the vertebrae or just the back tissues of the neck? Let's see what we can do there and experience there. So just for me, just sending my awareness more so there, specifically there, I feel the vertebrae, the space between the vertebrae and the neck increase. I feel an even better alignment of the jawline and neck, and where the back crown of the head should be pointed. All that happens naturally. It's not that I'm doing it because I know where it's supposed to be. It happens by sending greater awareness there. And it's still happening quite nicely. And just to go a little further with this idea of Ting, of really listening, really sensing, so I'll just kind of narrate what's kind of happening here for me. So as this continued to open more and more and more, which feels so much more healthy, literally the vertebrae and the cushions between the vertebrae are not grinding anymore, because that's what happens to all of us, right? Here and lower back, all gets ground up. So that's released and opened. And as that occurred even more, which felt very good, very opening, very freeing, but I felt a correlated kind of tightening or pulling in other areas, chest and upper back, that were kind of resisting that opening, or those tissues are being slightly challenged in lengthening and opening, and they're meeting the endpoint of their where they're normally at, or at least today where they've been at. And so they're pulled a little bit taut, and then they're going to resist that and tighten up into that. So then I have to use Ting and E. E is intention, Y, I, E is intention. So the Ting revealed to me the subsequent and correlated pulling and tightness here and here. So I use E, intention, to coax those tissues to be okay with that extra stretch. And so it's starting to open and release a little bit. There's still some tension, tightness, and shortness there in those tissues. And they're continually being gently stretched and tugged and coaxed by the opening that I can do very well here. And so I'm staying with that process. And so this area here and here is gently being coaxed, triggered into lengthening, opening, releasing. That's a whole different part of the body from where I went.
Yeah, I'm not noticing so much. I mean, a little bit of opening in the neck, but a similar process with the mid-back, the thoracic vertebrae. There's a lot of tightness right around a couple of the vertebrae. And so as that works to, be just slightly less tight, because I'm not sure I can call it open. And then I noticed that the ribs that are attaching there, I can feel more fully in that part of my rib cage, whereas before it was normally tight.
Mm-hmm. So stay there for a little bit, for a few breaths, and notice again what it's doing as you've explained, and stay open to a little bit of an encouragement to allow it to be gently stretched or challenged into, gently invited, intentfully invited to continue that little bit of stretch into going towards opening. Notice when I'm working that area specifically now, my breath tightening a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. And when I say that the breath tightened a little bit when I went to this tightness here, and I release it a little bit, the breath, I'm noticing the tightness in the breath. That's very, very subtle. Doesn't seem subtle to me really now, but let's say years ago, I wouldn't have noticed that at all. And then less than a few years ago, a little closer to the time now, I may have noticed it as a very, very, very subtle, oh yeah, there's still some tightness there. I can't release. And so what seemed like very subtle or just outside our awareness becomes very clear, very big. So working not only the edge of our physicality, allowing it to open and stretch, but the edge of our awareness.
And so can you speak a little bit about, because this is where the experience of this process over time kind of feels contradictory in a way, that as my sensitivity grows, it, like, all of these little points feel louder. Whereas before, when I was denser and more numb, something that was quite tight felt somewhat tight. You know what I mean? Like it's like the balance, the scales get tipped and sort of like the challenge of how to be present with all this sensitivity when in fact it's probably less tight than 5 years ago when I barely felt it, but it was probably rock solid.
Right. Yes. And that is the process for sure along this path. As your Ting develops, you get finer in your awareness. And so those little things become bigger and louder. And as we have mentioned before in a similar context, that's why this is such a frustrating path. And so it's easy, if no one ever talked about this, if a person never heard this, all they're getting is, oh, I'm just so tight. If anything, I'm just getting more tight. Maybe I should stop doing this because it seems like you're getting more and more tight. But what's happening is that you're becoming more and more aware of the tightness. But also to add to the complexity of it is we might be getting more tight in certain ways as we work the body, depending on the training and things that you're doing. So some things, when you're doing things more intense, like the shoulder opening exercises, there can be a reaction in the body that holds on. So there's certain, as we work the body in ways that we haven't before, the body can be tightening up. And it's not that the body doesn't ever tighten up. It might go through phases where it does actually tighten up, potentially in areas that weren't that tight in that way before. That's all part of the process. So, but generally speaking, we get better at the tightness that was always there, better at knowing, listening to, tinging the tightness and density that was always there, the denseness that was always there. So, kind of cutting ourselves some slack with that understanding, giving ourselves a pat on the back, because actually, that's a victory, that's a development. That's development. But if we don't know that, then we have nothing to balance out the frustration. So knowing as part of the path that there's discomfort, whether it's because we're getting more conscious of the discomfort or because we're actually causing some discomfort because of the training. That's part of the path. And so when you can go, oh, okay, it's really good, I'm aware of this. And especially when it's really clear, I'm aware of something that I just wasn't able to be aware of before. That's a really, really good thing. It doesn't feel good necessarily physically, but it's a real good thing. So that makes it easier to not be so hard on ourselves and gives us more space to want to do this more. Eventually, what also helps when you notice more discomfort, or at sometimes what you might call even pain, to a large degree, more and more, that just becomes sensation. Rather than pain or even discomfort, it becomes, oh, that's that sensation of tightness. I want to work with that. So that helps along the way too, because we're not being judgmental with, oh, this is painful, this is uncomfortable, and we all have a conditioned sense in our mind we want to move away from discomfort. I'll just touch upon that, I'll jump on that for a second. Part of this path, if a person goes far, or actually deep, and thus far with Tai Chi or any internal art, you get to a place where you embrace discomfort. You embrace it, and it becomes a constant companion to the point eventually where it's not uncomfortable anymore. It's not so much discomfort, it's a sensation. That's important not only for the continuing progress, but also it makes us more resilient. We're not so gun shy of uncomfortable, not so gun shy of it. Doesn't matter. We come to equanimity.
Okay.
So yeah,
like another way to say this, so your aversion to the sensation goes away.
that's a good way to put it.
Okay. Okay.
So aversion becomes diluted and dissipated, and even can be supplanted with interest, curiosity.
I think that's very fascinating because I've experienced some of that, because I've mentioned of those that sensitivity and that aversion, and it would make me contract more. But now I'm just sort of softening into it
Right.
and becoming. So I'm getting a sense of the start of that, and it is a very different way of being with it.
It's very different. It's totally different. It's another example where it's 180 degrees opposite direction of normal.
Yeah, and before it had a fear attached to it, and not just an aversion. That is lessening, or so I like to think.
Well, no, the fact that you can even articulate it, it's definitely occurring. Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's good actually. Yeah, it can be even more than aversion. It can be a fear, it can be an acute fear. It can be a panic even, depending on what it is, where it is. The person, it can be an acute fear going into anxiety and all that.
Right.
So what we're talking about is a process. This is interesting because as we're changing the body, we're talking physiologically, body in terms of tissues, mind-body connection. But now we're also in the arena of personal development, spiritual development. We become more resilient beings. How resilient are we not when we're always in aversion? And that's the typical state of humanity, right? Is we're always looking for comfort and we're running away from discomfort, what we judge as comfort and discomfort. And so we're literally just a ping pong ball. Really, this is one example, they say, spiritual paths that we're basically unconscious, or we don't really have free will. We're basically, kind of somewhat sentient robots. And this is a big part of why that is said, because we're just always moving away by the prodding, the pokes, and trying to find where the escape is from all that prodding and pokes. And so we're not really free and not really in dominion. So this is a huge path of, this is where it becomes a path of personal dominion, personal development. And a word that's quite powerful is equanimity. You're not caught between extremes of hot and cold. I don't like this, I want this. But the problem with I want this, I want the comfort never stays. It never lasts. The happiness never stays and never lasts, because typically it's externally generated. And so you're constantly in that pinball. You're never in a place of settled center, settledness, and freedom. So it's leading